How did the Lord tell me to move to Texas? I learned how to hear his voice. I stopped making excuses and I obeyed the first time. This is going to be a series where I break down before the promise leading to the altar of I do. Surprise! I'm married. Those of you who have been rocking with me for a minute, it's no surprise because you've been seeing the mans pop up on all the videos. How did I know it was God that told me to move to Texas? How quick did I obey from the moment I felt like God was calling me to Texas? And what did that process look like? It started with me deciding to move in the direction God had been calling me into. 2017 was the moment I surrendered to God, giving him my all or nothing yes as I was graduating college. The Lord telling me, get out of this relationship, I'll bring it back. My immaturity thought that God would bring that man back. I submitted to the process to get to the point of the promise. Now, hear me out, because this has been an 8-year journey for the girl. Yes, I gave my life to Christ at 11, and between battling the promises of God and the peer pressure of people, we finally surrendered at 21, graduating college in 2017, starting my journey, being ushered into this wilderness season. I'm a firm believer that the only way to know you're healed is to go back into environments that cause you pain and walk it out. Before an arrow is sent forward, it has to be pulled back. I submitted to this season, the crushing, the becoming who God says I am. When you're called to something, your greatest area of resistance is typically the area that you will have the most authority in. From 2018 until 2020 was my identity building season, my transformation season, my legacy season. The 3 years that God really dealt with the posture of my heart. Learning God as a father gives provision, protection, and purpose. Learning how to read my Bible, how to understand the word, how to pray, how to fast, that help us to go through the refinement process. The spiritual disciplines, what does solitude look like? What does growing in healthy community look like? What does putting boundaries in place look like? Little background context. I was the first Black female vice president for the Student Government Association at my university. I didn't understand how that aligned in the moment with me wanting to be creative director for ESPN. Before I graduated, God started radically coming after me. I was hospitalized for a panic attack, and I knew it didn't align with who I believe God to be. I stood in the mirror and said, God, I'm giving you a year to prove who you are. A year later, I fully surrendered to the Lord, moving back home post-graduation. My relationship ended. I'm at this internship. I'm thinking God's about to send me out, and he sends me back home to go through the healing process. Started my first big girl job in October of 2018. I'm only there for 6 months. I remember a lady saying, remember why you're there, you won't be there long. I'm like, God, I just got this job and you're already giving me warning to not get complacent. Often we want to rush through the process. We want to put a time frame on God. When the Lord sent me back home after being at Elevation for the 4 months during the internship, I thought I was only going to be there temporarily, 3 months, but it turned into 3 years. During the pandemic, when George Floyd died, that righteous indignation came up in me. I realized that it was going to take a united church to heal a divided nation. The Lord was pulling on my voice, pulling on the poetry gift inside of me, because I had been this spoken word artist. Writing is actually my first love. And somewhere along the way, I found another outlet through design. Now running my own business, I launched my LLC post-grad. Before going into the internship, I understood the power of working for somebody. Sometimes you have to be a Joseph, a second in command. Sometimes you have to serve the vision before you can lead. All great leaders must follow well. During the George Floyd protesting, I met a white couple that was really challenging themselves to have tough conversations, wanting to invite us into their home to have these tough conversations, but because of COVID, it just never worked out. I remember sitting in my room watching the Becoming documentary with Michelle Obama. I knew that there was more to my life. She never foresaw herself being the wife of a president, but everything was in place for her to get to that destination. It makes me wonder, who are we really and where are we going because of who our Father is? I had interned during college at my aunt's law firm. God will use things as vehicles to get us to where we need to be. My relationship that ended in 2018, where I thought he was going to be my husband, that was just a vehicle to get me closer to God. And law became the vehicle to get me to Texas. I remember calling my mom saying, I think I want to be a lawyer. I had this revelation on Friday. I'm a girl of repetition. All you got to do is tell me 3 times and I'll do it. Obeying isn't something I delayed. Safety is found in obedience. That Sunday, my pastor gets on the mic abruptly. I don't understand why we don't have any lawyers in this house. This is confirmation. This is the word of the Lord. That night, I signed up to take the LSAT and started the process to study so that I could position myself to get into law schools. I wanted God to provide God's will, God's bill. If you're calling me to law, God, then you're going to pay for it. I truly expected God to provide every step of the way. As I'm studying for the LSAT in 2020, from about May to October, I had to reschedule 2 times. Every time I would get ready to go and take the exam, I would get really dizzy, couldn't get up, couldn't walk. And when I would push the test back, the dizziness would go away. The Bible says that when you trust in God, lean not into your own understanding, acknowledge him in all of your ways, he will set straight your path. This was God orchestrating my steps. I was on the path and God was doing what he needed to do to get me in alignment and to continue moving forward how he desired. Around October, I had a meeting with my pastors, letting them know I feel like the Lord is calling me to Texas to go to the University of Texas at Austin. I would move to Texas, get residency. At the time, UTA was ranked one of the top 20 schools. While I was working the job in October of 2018, the Lord started to talk to me about school. I'd said I would never go back to school. While being planted at my church, we came out of the I'll never vows. God used that job to plant the seed of school. By the time George Floyd happened, that seed was planted. At one point, wanted to go to MIT to get a master's in science. Knew God was going to open that door, and it didn't happen. It was just this continuation of getting to the point of where God needed me to be. My pastors gave me the blessing. One of the pastors in the Texas area follows me randomly on social media, but puts that church on my radar. That was confirmation for me. I remember calling a friend a few days later, and I say, God doesn't confirm a thing until I make up in my mind I'm going to do it. I'm going to move to Texas to get residency, to study the LSAT there. Then I'll apply to a law school in about a year or 2. I am all about privacy, keeping a thing concealed so that it cannot be tampered with in infancy. As the Lord leads, I will share and I will testify. I use wisdom on who becomes a part of the circle because I want to know that you're praying for me, not the seed that the enemy needs to try to cause chaos and disruption. That night, this elder calls me and I share with her, I feel like the Lord is calling me to Texas to get residency. She says, I was cleaning up yesterday and I heard the Lord say that your promotion is in your relocation. I had just told my friend earlier in the day that God doesn't confirm a thing until I make up in my mind that I'm going to do it. A few days go by and one of my friends that I met during my elevation season, who was to given a promise with her heart and her husband, the Lord told her that she would get a new heart and a husband. She got married and then had her heart transplant a month later. Talk about the fulfillment of a promise. On the other side of her surgery, we were supposed to talk on a Friday. We didn't talk until a Sunday. Remember, I'm a girl of repetition. This is me learning how to hear the voice of the Lord, learning how God speaks to me through colors, through numbers, nothing demonic, but strictly biblical, strictly learning God's nature, his characteristic, trusting that God has my best intention in mind, and resting in the fact that even if I make a decision that doesn't align with what God wants, because my decision was made from that place of relationship with God, that he will get me to where I need to be. I'm on the phone, about an hour goes by. I tell her, I feel like the Lord is telling me to move to Texas. She starts screaming, Janae, I know you will believe me, but the Lord woke me up last night at 3 a.m. and told me that you were moving to Austin. Excuse me? There goes confirmation number 2. And proceeds to sow into my life a number that is represented with grace. I came to Texas for the first time in college, my first time on a plane in another state by myself. And sometimes God will have you survey a space and a land before he sends you in it to occupy it. Around election time, I remember going to the DMV and there was a white man standing in front of me. Because of COVID, we were outside, mask on. The Lord tells me to share some information with him. I tell him I'm a designer. I have my own design agency. I got let go of my first job April 1st of 2019. No April Fools. I launched my business in October of 2019 and the Lord sent clients. I never had a portfolio. I never had to beg and plead. God simply provided. I knew that if God was going to send me to Texas, he had to get me a job. I'm standing at the DMV telling this man I'm preparing to look for a job in law. I want to become a lawyer. He's like, where are you thinking about going to school? I was like, the University of Texas at Austin. This man looks at me and says, you're going to move there and get residency, right? There goes confirmation number 3, because I ain't never told nobody else that I was going to move and get residency. I'm looking at him and he's looking at me and he tells me how proud he is. He's excited at me. He gives me a hug, tells me I'm going to do great. And when I get in the car, I realize that God used him as a father. Mark 10:29-30 says, truly I say to you, leave behind mother, brother, sister, father, land, children, and I will give it back to you 100 times fold. In this age, with persecution, mother, sister, brother, father, land, God will use people to be what you need them to be in that moment. I needed a father to give direction to my purpose. This man allowed himself to be used by God to confirm what God was already speaking. I was determined. I got the blessing of the Lord. I had the confirmation times 3. The Lord was showing up in ways that didn't make sense. I needed to get a legal job. As I'm cleaning up my resume, I get a call from one of the chancellors at my university. She puts me in contact with an opportunity. It doesn't happen, but the Lord tells me he's putting my name on the hearts of those that are in position to give me an opportunity, that my name is going into spaces and places that I may not physically tread. I get on Clubhouse and I see that there's an opportunity to work at a remote intellectual property law firm. I applied to the position to become a legal assistant. The Lord tells me they're going to pull on my design skills. I get on that interview with 5 women, talk about grace, at 5 o'clock. The CEO is like, your analytical side and your faith side is battling each other, and God just wants you to show the fullness of who he's called you to be. We're going to create this position for you. I went from part-time to full-time in 3 weeks. I had to have this tough conversation with my mom about what I felt like the Lord was saying. I had to believe God and trust God because I didn't want to get to heaven and God say, this is what I had for you, but this is who you listen to. Our parents, our friends, people around us, their intentions may be pure. However, sometimes it requires us to go against even what they're saying because our life is on the line and there is safety in obedience. In January of 21, I started my process of moving to Texas, applied to an apartment, got approved without ever seeing it. In this process of transition, I would get phone calls about people praying against counterfeits, words from the Lord about don't get distracted, your husband is in this next season, who would accurately describe who my husband would be. Now that he is here, I can look back at those words and see how God was preparing me. I like to look at prophetic words as assurance of what's to come. God is not a man that shall lie. And yes, prophetic words are often conditional based off of the decisions that we make. Our response and our decisions can dictate and alter the outcome. However, if we trust and we believe and we move in the direction that God is saying, we have this insurance to know that it will happen. What's interesting is I remember looking on YouTube and seeing a video that said, Rebecca, it's time to go. And this lady is talking about how God is getting ready to relocate his daughters geographically. If it's God's will, it's God's bill, and he will provide every step of the way. All we have to do is move in faith and do what it is that he's telling us to do, because God is positioning us to be found by our kingdom spouses. I end up going to a coffee shop a few weeks later, see this girl who looks really familiar, start a conversation with her. As she's leaving, we connect on social media, and I learned that her name is Rebecca, and she's connected to the couple that I met during the George Floyd protest that God used in that season to deal with me about law school. I jumped up from the table, ran to Rebecca's car. As I'm approaching her car, I see that her license plate says Texas. I said, Rebecca, you're from, she's like, yeah, I just moved here from Texas. And I'm like, wait a minute. I just came across a YouTube video that said, Rebecca, it's time to go. And what are the odds that the couple God would use to help start this conversation with law, you would move from Texas and be living with them? These things are not coincidences. Our pessimism, our doubt, our unbelief quenches the words that God is speaking because we don't take our thoughts captive. We don't do what Philippians 4:8 to think about what's pure, what's just, what's worthy to be praised. We rather make excuses. We don't listen and learn how the Lord speaks to us because we don't have a relationship with him. How did I know the Lord told me to move to Texas? I started to develop my relationship with him way before he told me to move. So by the time he moved, I knew I had to just make a decision to obey. And as I obeyed, God would provide. He provided everything he said he would on this side of the promise. The husband came. We'll be back next week to talk about what happens when you say yes to God and you believe that God is bringing the promise, but you have to endure that waiting period. Because when I moved to Texas, between the time that I moved and got married to my husband, it was difficult All of this is for the maturing of our faith. The Bible says to count it all joy when we are faced with trials of various kinds, because it creates in us an endurance and a character that is perfect and complete and lacking nothing. Allow this to encourage you to obey the first time, that if God said it, he's gonna do it, and the reward of your obedience is greater than the delay of your disobedience. Hit the subscribe button, come back for part 2, because we're all in this together. If you're new here, my name is Janae Carly. My goal is to inspire you to grow in life, faith, and business. Holla.